The midday sun beat down relentlessly on the asphalt when Victoria Hayes decided to roll down the window of the black Mercedes. She had been traveling for 3 hours from the capital, and the car's air conditioning had given her a headache. Or perhaps it was the stress, or maybe the 62 corporate meetings she had endured over the last 30 days. Her hair was swept up into a perfect bun, her pearl gray pantsuit was without a single crease, and the dark sunglasses she wore cost more than most people's monthly salary. But at that moment, as she watched the green fields blur past on both sides of the highway, all she longed for was something simple, something authentic, something that wasn't wrapped in corporate letterhead and confidentiality agreements. Then she saw it, a small stand on the side of the road. Fruit was piled high in the wooden crates, a faded awning shielding it from the sun, and a hand-painted sign read, "Today's watermelons, the sweetest on the road." Without a second thought, Victoria signaled to Thomas, her chauffeur, to pull over. "Miss Hayes, are you sure?" Thomas asked, his voice laced with the restrained concern he always used whenever she stepped outside of protocol. "We can get fruit at the hotel. I want a real watermelon, Thomas, not one that's passed through 5 middlemen and an industrial cooling chamber." The chauffeur sighed but complied. The Mercedes glided to a smooth stop in front of the stand, kicking up a small cloud of dust that stood in stark contrast to the car's immaculate finish. Victoria stepped out of the car and immediately felt the real heat, not the climate-controlled air of her office or her penthouse. It was sweltering, honest, alive. She removed her sunglasses and took in the stand. A man was there, arranging the fruit. He wore a white t-shirt splattered with dirt, faded jeans, and scuffed work boots. His dark hair was tousled by the wind, and his hands were large and calloused, the hands of a man who worked with them every single day. When he looked up and saw her, he didn't offer the automatic deference Victoria was so accustomed to receiving, just a calm smile and a curious gaze. "Good morning," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Looking for anything in particular?" "A watermelon," Victoria replied, the word feeling ridiculously simple on her tongue as if she'd never purchased fruit for herself before, which, to be honest, was very close to the truth. The man nodded and walked over to the stacked watermelons. He picked up a large, perfectly green one, with the dark stripes that promised sweetness within. He held it with ease, as if it weighed nothing, and brought it close to his ear. He gave it a few thumps with his knuckles. "This one's perfect," he said, looking her straight in the eye, not at her expensive suit, not at the Mercedes, but at her. "But it's not for you." Victoria blinked. "I'm sorry?" "This watermelon," he repeated, holding the fruit as if it were a treasure. "It's not for you. It's too big. If you live alone, you'll end up wasting half of it. And a watermelon like this deserves to be enjoyed completely, not left to rot in a fancy refrigerator while you forget it even exists." A silence fell, one so profound that Victoria could hear the buzzing of insects in the nearby fields. From inside the car, Thomas gave an uncomfortable cough, probably hoping she would put the man in his place. But Victoria remained silent, because he was right. She lived alone in a 300-square-meter apartment where she rarely cooked, where food arrived in disposable containers from gourmet restaurants, where the refrigerator was more of a decorative piece than a functional appliance. "So, what do you suggest?" she asked, her voice coming out softer than she'd intended. The man set down the large watermelon and picked up a smaller one. He weighed it in his hands, tapped it again with his knuckles, and nodded, satisfied. "This one is the perfect size for someone who probably doesn't even have time to sit down for a proper meal. Sweet, juicy, and you won't feel guilty when some of it goes to waste, because you'll definitely finish this one." Victoria looked at him. Really looked at him. He had a small scar just above his left eyebrow, warm brown eyes that seemed to be perpetually smiling, and the quiet confidence of a man who knew his exact place in the world without needing to prove it. "Do you always psychoanalyze your customers?" she asked, crossing her arms. "Only the ones who step out of cars that cost more than my house and land combined to buy a watermelon they could find in any upscale supermarket," he replied with a mischievous grin. "It makes me curious what they're really looking for." "A watermelon. I already told you. No, he said, shaking his head as he wrapped the fruit in newspaper. Nobody stops here just for a watermelon. There are 20 other stands on the way. This is stop number 21. So the real question is, what are you running from? The words landed between them like stones in a still pond. Victoria felt something stir in her chest, something uncomfortable and true. That's none of your business, she said, but her voice wasn't sharp with annoyance. It was just tired. You're right, he conceded, holding out the wrapped watermelon. That'll be 50 pesos. Victoria opened her handbag, a Hermes that cost more than his entire stand, and pulled out a 500 peso note. She held it out to him. The man glanced at the bill, then back at her, and let out a soft chuckle. I don't have change for this. Don't you have anything smaller? No, Victoria said, and realized it was true. It had been years since she'd handled small amounts of cash. Her life ran on corporate cards and wire transfers. Do you take cards? He gestured broadly at the humble stand. Do you see a card reader anywhere around here? Victoria glanced around. The situation was absurd. Here she was, standing in the middle of nowhere, holding a watermelon she wasn't even sure she wanted, unable to pay because she only carried rich people's money. It's fine, the vendor said with a shrug. Just take it. You can pay me some other day. And you trust me to come back? No, he admitted with disarming honesty. But if you don't, I'll be out 50 pesos, and I'll have gained a good story. Seems like a fair trade to me. Victoria held the watermelon, feeling its solid weight in her hands. How long had it been since she'd carried anything herself? There were always assistants, employees, chauffeurs. What's your name? She asked, not entirely sure why. Ethan Walker, but everyone calls me Ethan. This is my stand. Well, technically it belongs to my grandmother, but she says she's too old to be out in the sun all day, so she passed it on to me, she asked, and I wasn't sure why she was asking. My name is Ethan Walker, but people call me Ethan, and this is my stall. Well, technically it belongs to my grandmother, but she says she's gotten too old to be under the sun all day, so she passed it down to me. He paused for a moment. And now, a quick break for you. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on more tales like this one. Your support truly inspires us to keep creating content we know you'll love. Now, let's continue. Victoria. Just Victoria. No important last name to intimidate me then. She couldn't help but smile. Hayes, but yes, just Victoria's fine. Perfect. Well then, just enjoy your watermelon. And when you come back to pay me, wear something a little more comfortable. That suit looks expensive, but it doesn't seem very practical in this heat. Without another word, Victoria walked back to the Mercedes. Thomas opened the door for her, a look of palpable relief on his face, as if she had just escaped from a dangerous situation. The car pulled away smoothly, leaving the stand and the man with the easy smile behind them. For the entire journey back, Victoria held the watermelon on her lap. She didn't place it on the empty seat beside her. She held it, feeling its weight, its smooth texture, its warmth from the sun, and at some point during the drive, she realized she was smiling. That evening, in her minimalist apartment with its sweeping panoramic view of the city, Victoria cut into the watermelon. Thomas had offered to do it for her, but she insisted. She took a large kitchen knife she rarely used and, with a bit of awkwardness, sliced the fruit open. The inside was a deep, brilliant red, filled with perfectly arranged, glossy black seeds. The juice streamed across the cutting board, staining her hands. It was a mess. It was perfect. She cut off a slice, brought it to her lips, and the flavor exploded on her tongue. Sweet, fresh, with that crisp texture only a truly ripe watermelon possesses. She closed her eyes. Ethan had been right. It was perfect. For the next 3 days, Victoria couldn't get the fruit vendor out of her mind. It wasn't romantic, she told herself. It was merely curiosity. No one had spoken to her that way in years. Without deference, without fear, without wanting something from her. Then, on Wednesday, during a board meeting where they were discussing figures that would make most people weep, Victoria found herself thinking about watermelons, about roadside fruit stands, about calloused hands holding a piece of fresh fruit. On Thursday, she canceled a business dinner. On Friday, she told Thomas to prepare the car. They were taking a drive. "Where to, Miss Hayes?" "You'll see." The Mercedes pulled up to the stand at the exact same time as the week before. Ethan was there, this time hauling a crate of mangoes. When he saw the car, he straightened up, shielded his eyes from the sun with his hand, and smiled. Victoria stepped out of the car. This time, she wore jeans, a cream-colored linen blouse, and flat sandals. No heels, no ostentatious jewelry, just her. "You came back," Ethan said, sounding genuinely surprised. "I owe you 50 pesos, Victoria replied, holding out a 100 peso bill. Ethan took it, rummaged in his pocket, and handed her the change. Their fingers brushed for a fleeting moment during the exchange. They both noticed. Neither of them said a word. "So, how was the watermelon?" "Perfect. You were right. I finished the whole thing in 3 days." "See? I told you I picked the right one." He paused. "Did you really come all this way just to pay me? That's a 3-hour drive for 50 pesos. Maybe I wanted another watermelon." "Maybe," Ethan repeated, not believing her for a second. "Or maybe," he continued, "you wanted to find out if I really do have good stories, like I said last time." Victoria leaned back against the Mercedes. She crossed her arms and looked him straight in the eye. "You have good stories, Ethan Walker." "Some, but the best ones require time and probably something to drink. It's very hot out here. That's an invitation." "That depends. Do you accept invitations from fruit vendors who don't have a credit card machine?" Victoria glanced towards Thomas, who was observing the scene with increasing concern from inside the car. Then she looked back at Ethan, at his honest eyes and his unassuming smile. "Thomas," she called out, "go back to the hotel. I'll return later." "But, Miss Hayes—" "Later, Thomas." The driver hesitated, obviously struggling between his duty and his respect for his employer. Finally, he nodded, got into the Mercedes, and pulled away slowly, checking the rearview mirror as if he expected her to change her mind. Once the car had vanished into the distance, Victoria turned back towards Ethan. "So, about those stories. I'm waiting." Ethan smiled, reached for a small cooler from under his stand, and pulled out 2 cold bottles of water. "First things first, I'm afraid there's no champagne here." "Only water. Is that a problem?" "Not in the slightest." "Good, because the first story is about how I ended up selling fruit instead of being an architect. Which is what I was supposed to become." Victoria took the bottle, twisted it open, and took a drink. The water was ice-cold and delicious. "I'm listening." And so, Ethan began to speak. He told her about university, about his dreams of designing buildings, about the day his grandmother suffered a stroke and he had to abandon everything to care for her. He told her how he learned there was more dignity in selling watermelons with honesty than in many of the corporate offices where he'd interned. He told her about the people who would stop by the stand, each with their own stories, their own burdens. "What about you?" Ethan asked after a moment. "What's your story, beyond the obvious fact that you have a lot of money?" To her own surprise, Victoria began to talk. She told him about the family business she inherited at 24 years old when her father passed away unexpectedly. She told him about the sleepless nights, about decisions that impacted thousands of employees, about the loneliness of being at the top, where no one speaks to you honestly because everyone wants something from you. "That's why I came here," she finally admitted. "That's why I stopped. Because I saw your stand and thought, now there's something real, something that isn't calculated or strategically planned." "And did you find it?" Victoria looked at him. The sun was starting to go down, painting the sky in shades of orange and rose. The heat had eased up a bit. From somewhere nearby you could hear birds singing as they settled in for the night. "Yes," she said, "I believe I did." What happened next was unexpected for both of them. Victoria began visiting the stand every Friday. At first, she would find excuses. She needed fruit. She wanted to try the mangoes. The avocados looked perfect. But soon, they both stopped pretending. She came because she wanted to see Ethan, and Ethan started looking forward to those Fridays with an eagerness he didn't feel for anything else. They talked about everything, from cheap philosophy to expensive food, of abandoned dreams and new ones they barely dared to whisper aloud, about the differences between their worlds, which were so vast they were almost comical. "You know what the strangest part is?" Ethan said one afternoon as they shared a watermelon by the roadside. "You and I probably never would have met under normal circumstances. We live in the same city, but we're worlds apart." "Not so far apart," Victoria protested. "We're both just people." "Yeah, but you're the kind of person who likely spends more on one dinner than I make in a month." "I'm not saying it with resentment. It's just a fact." Victoria fell silent because it was true, and she didn't know how to feel about it. "Does that bother you?" she finally asked. "No," Ethan said honestly. "It makes me curious. I wonder what a woman like you sees in a guy like me." "I see someone real," Victoria replied without hesitating. "I see someone who looks at me, not at my bank account or my family name. I see someone who sold me a watermelon and charged me exactly what it was worth, without trying to take advantage of me or to impress me." "Well, when you put it that way. Besides," she added with a small smile, "you're the only man in years who has told me no. That something wasn't for me, who didn't try to give me what I asked for just because I could pay for it." Ethan laughed. "That was more survival instinct than anything. I didn't want to be responsible for you wasting food." But there was something more in his eyes, something they both felt but didn't yet dare to name. The weeks passed, and Fridays became Victoria's favorite day. She started dressing more casually, leaving the weight of her last name behind, at least for a few hours. With Ethan, it was simple. She was just herself, with no scripts or expectations. One afternoon, after 2 months of these meetings, Ethan proposed something different. "My grandmother wants to meet you." Victoria nearly spit out her water. "What?" "I told her about you. I told her a customer stops by every Friday and we've become friends. She's too perceptive." She knew there was something more. "And what did you tell her?" "The truth, that I like you, that I'm probably a fool for even thinking about it. Because we clearly come from completely different worlds, but that I like you anyway." Victoria's heart beat faster, not out of nervousness but relief, because she had been feeling the same way and feared she was alone in it. "Me too," she whispered. "I like you too." Ethan smiled, that smile of his that lit up his whole face. "Then come for dinner. Nothing fancy. Just a home-cooked meal in a small house with an 80-year-old lady who will probably give you the 3rd degree." "When?" "Tomorrow." And so, on a Saturday afternoon, Victoria found herself sitting in a tiny but impeccably clean kitchen, sharing chicken stew with an elderly woman with bright eyes who indeed asked her more questions than any journalist. "And what does your family say about you coming here?" asked Ethan's grandmother, Helen Brooks, as she served more rice onto Victoria's plate without waiting for a reply. "They don't know," Victoria admitted. "My parents passed away. I have no siblings, only employees and business partners. That sounds lonely, child." "It is." Helen Brooks nodded as if she understood perfectly. She gave Victoria's hand a pat. "Ethan is a good boy. Sometimes too good. He put his dreams aside to take care of me. He shouldn't have, but that's just who he is. It's him." "Grandma," Ethan began uncomfortably. "Let me finish. What I mean is, he deserves to be happy, and you, child, you also look like you could use a little bit of happiness. So if you're going to do this, do it right, with honesty, no games." Victoria looked at Ethan. Ethan looked back at her. "Deal," they both said at the same time. That night, walking back to the stand where Thomas was waiting patiently with the Mercedes, Ethan took Victoria's hand. It was a simple, natural gesture, as if they had been doing it their whole lives. "You know what this means, right?" Ethan said. "If we continue, things are going to get complicated. People are going to talk. They're going to say I'm with you for your money, that you're having an existential crisis." "Let them talk," Victoria replied, intertwining her fingers with his. "I've spent my whole life worrying about what people think. I'm tired. And what are you going to do about it?" Victoria stopped, looked at him, and in that moment under the country stars, far from the city lights and the expectations of her corporate world, she knew exactly what she was going to do. I'm going to choose to be happy for once in my life. I'm going to choose something just because I want it, not because it's strategically convenient or socially acceptable. Ethan smiled and drew her toward him. Their first kiss tasted of sweet watermelon and simple promises, of truth and possibilities. When Victoria finally returned to the Mercedes, Thomas noticed something different about her. There was a light in her eyes he hadn't seen in years, maybe never. "Everything all right, Miss Hayes?" "More than all right, Thomas. For the first time in a long time, everything is exactly as it should be." And as the Mercedes pulled away down the dark road, Victoria looked out of the back window. Ethan was still there, standing by the stand, his hand raised in farewell. A simple figure against the starry sky. She had gone looking for a watermelon, but she had found something infinitely more valuable. She had found someone who saw her, truly saw her, and decided she was worth getting to know anyway. And that, she thought, as she smiled in the darkness of the car, was priceless. But reality, as always, has a way of complicating even the simplest things. On Monday morning, when Victoria arrived at her office on the 32nd floor of the city's most imposing corporate building, she found her executive assistant, Carolina, waiting for her with a poorly concealed expression of concern. "Miss Hayes, we have a problem." Victoria placed her briefcase on the glass desk and poured herself a coffee from the Italian machine in her private office. Another perfect, soulless coffee. "What kind of problem?" "The kind of problem that comes with photographs," Carolina said, holding out a tablet. On the screen were several images. Victoria recognized them immediately. Her and Ethan walking together, laughing, sharing food, and the most compromising one, the kiss under the stars. "Where did these come from?" Victoria asked, keeping her voice calm, though her heart had started to race. "A local gossip blog published them last night. Apparently, someone saw you and decided it was interesting news. Heiress to the Hayes Industries fortune is having a secret affair with a street vendor. You know how these gossip sites operate," Victoria said, sitting down with the tablet. The photographs were of a decent quality. Whoever took them knew exactly what they were doing. "Have the board members seen this?" "3 of them called me before 7 this morning. Do they want an emergency meeting this afternoon?" Of course they did. The company's public image, the Hayes family's reputation, the appearances that had to be upheld. Victoria knew the speech by heart. She had heard it her entire life. "Schedule the meeting for 3, she said finally, and, Carolina, don't breathe a word of this to anyone else. When her assistant left, Victoria found herself staring at the photographs. She looked happy in them, genuinely happy. It wasn't the corporate smile she had perfected for the covers of business magazines. It was a real smile, without filters, without a mask. She picked up her personal cell phone, the one she almost never used, as most of her communications were handled through corporate lines. Ethan didn't have this number. In fact, they had never exchanged numbers. Their encounters had always been organic, without the need for text messages or scheduled calls, but now she needed to warn him. That afternoon, instead of going to the stand directly, Victoria did something she had never done before. She sent Thomas with a handwritten note. "We need to talk. Things have become complicated. Can you come into the city tonight? I'll send the address. S." The meeting with the board of directors was exactly as awful as she had expected. 5 men and 2 women, all older than her, all with significant shares in the company, and all with very clear opinions about how she should live her life. "Victoria, we understand that you're young," began Richard Whitman, the oldest member of the board. "But you must understand that your personal image is directly tied to the image of this company. We are a corporation that manages billions of pesos in investments. Our partners require confidence, stability, and a romance with a fruit vendor doesn't exactly project that image," finished Diane Marshall, the director of public relations. "The photographs are already circulating. By tomorrow, they could be in the newspapers. And what does that matter?" Victoria asked, surprising herself with her own calmness. Since when is my private life any business of the board? Since you agreed to be the public face of this company, Whitman replied. Since your last name is on every building, on every contract, in every important negotiation. What Richard is trying to say, Emily Watkins, the youngest on the board, intervened in a softer tone, is that we must handle this carefully. If you continue with this relationship, it must be presented in a way that doesn't affect market perception. You want me to use him? Victoria asked, feeling anger begin to boil in her chest. For me to turn him into some kind of romantic story for public consumption, a controlled narrative where the successful businesswoman finds true love in unexpected places. The silence in the room was answer enough. Oh, Whitman continued, you can end this situation discreetly. Let the photographs be forgotten. In 2 weeks, nobody will remember this. Victoria looked at each one of them, people she had known for years, who had worked with her father, who had watched her grow up, and yet not one of them, not a single soul, was asking if she was happy, if Ethan was important to her, or if what she felt mattered at all. This meeting is over, Victoria said, rising to her feet. I will make my decision, and you will be informed. That evening, Ethan arrived at Victoria's apartment building with a backpack slung over his shoulder and a confused look on his face. The doorman, clearly taken aback by the stark contrast between this visitor and the building's usual residents, hesitated before calling up to Victoria's apartment to confirm. When Ethan stepped into the penthouse, his reaction was almost comical. He stood frozen in the entryway, gazing at the floor-to-ceiling windows, the panoramic view of the illuminated city, the designer furniture, the space that seemed to stretch on forever. So, he said after a moment, when you said you had money, you were being serious. Come, Victoria said, taking his hand and guiding him out to the terrace. She needed air, even if it was just the polluted city air. There's something you need to see. She showed him the photographs on the tablet. She watched his expression shift from surprise to concern. Who took these? I don't know, but they're already all over the internet. By tomorrow, they'll probably be everywhere. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Victoria had come to recognize as his telltale sign of stress. This is exactly what I was afraid of, he said. I knew our worlds were different, but this is on another level. The board of directors at my company wants me to either end things with you or turn you into some controlled public story. And what do you want? It was the right question, the only question that truly mattered. I want to be with you, Victoria said with a certainty that surprised even herself. But I need you to understand what that means. It means public scrutiny. It means people are going to speculate. They're going to make up stories. They're going to say you're with me for my money. I already know, Ethan replied. From the very beginning, I knew that if this became real, we would face that. But, Victoria, there's something I need to tell you too. He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. I'm not going to change who I am to fit into your world. I'm not going to wear expensive suits or learn to talk about stocks and corporate mergers. I'm a guy who sells watermelons on the side of the road. That's who I am, and I'm not ashamed of it. I don't want you to change, Victoria said instantly. What I want is to build something where we can both be ourselves without sacrificing who we are. Is that even really possible? Victoria thought of her office, of the endless meetings, of the expectations that had followed her for her entire life. She thought of the afternoons spent by the fruit stand, of the simple joy of sharing a watermelon, of Ethan's easy laughter. I'm going to make it possible, she said with determination. But I need you to trust me, and I need you to be ready, because the next few weeks are going to be tough. Ethan gave a slow nod. You know the wildest thing about all of this? Just 2 months ago, my biggest concern was if the watermelons would arrive fresh from the supplier. Now, I'm standing in a penthouse that's worth more than I'll make in my entire lifetime, talking about being featured in national newspapers. Do you have any regrets? Victoria asked, her voice laced with a vulnerability about ever having met him. Ethan looked her straight in the eye. Not for a single second. But I am scared, Victoria. Scared of losing you when all of this gets messy. Because it is going to get messy, isn't it? Probably. So, We need a plan. And right there on her penthouse terrace, as the city glittered beneath them like a sea of lights, Victoria and Ethan spent hours talking about setting boundaries, about what they would share with the public and what they would keep private, and about how to shield Helen Brooks from the media spotlight, about the fruit stand and the corporation, and how two worlds so vastly different could possibly coexist. "There's something else," Victoria said late into the night. "I've been thinking about something, about how to build a bridge between our two worlds." "What do you have in mind?" "My company has a social responsibility program. We invest in small businesses, in local entrepreneurs, and if we were to expand your stand not as a handout but as a legitimate investment, you could have multiple locations, hire more people, create something bigger." Ethan's brow furrowed. "I don't want people thinking I'm taking advantage of you." "You wouldn't be. It would be a real investment, with contracts, with an expected return. I've already reviewed the financials of similar businesses. It's a viable venture, but only if you want it." "I need to think about this," Ethan said honestly. "This is a lot to process in one night." "I know. Take all the time you need." When Ethan left later that night, Victoria stayed awake, gazing out at the city. She knew she'd made her decision. She wasn't going to hide anymore. She wasn't going to end things with Ethan just to please a boardroom of executives who only cared about numbers and appearances. The very next day, Victoria did something she had never done before. She called a press conference. Reporters packed the boardroom at Hayes Industries, their cameras poised, their questions ready. The board of directors was in attendance, though Whitman looked like he was on the verge of a heart attack. Victoria stepped up to the podium, dressed impeccably in a black power suit, her hair perfectly coiffed. She was the very picture of a serious, professional executive. "Good morning. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. I've called this press conference because certain photographs have been circulating over the past few days, and I wish to address the situation directly." Camera flashes erupted. The reporters leaned in. "Yes, I am in a relationship with Ethan Walker, and yes, he is a fruit vendor. And no, I do not consider that to be something for which I should feel ashamed or need to apologize. I have built Hayes Industries into one of the most successful companies in the country, founded on the values of integrity, transparency, and excellence, and I apply those very same values to my personal life." She paused, took a breath, and continued. "What I do in my personal time, and who I choose to spend that time with, is my own decision. However, I understand that as a public figure a certain amount of curiosity is expected, so here is my official statement. Ethan Walker is a hardworking man, honest, and one of the most dedicated entrepreneurs I have ever known. If that doesn't align with the image some people have of who I should be with, then, frankly, that is their problem, not mine." The silence in the room was absolute. Then, slowly, a journalist raised her hand. "Miss Hayes, are you saying that this is a serious relationship?" "I am saying that it is a relationship I value, and that is all you need to know." Another question came. "What does your family say about this?" "My family is deceased, so I suppose they don't have an opinion." The response was blunt, almost cruel in its honesty, but Victoria was tired of sugarcoating the truth. When the conference ended, Victoria returned to her office. Her phone was blowing up with messages from acquaintances, fellow business owners, and people she hadn't seen in years. Some were supportive, many were critical, but there was one message that mattered more than all the others. It was from Ethan. "I saw the conference. You didn't have to do that, but thank you for doing it. I'm always with you." Victoria smiled, put her phone away, and gazed out of her office window. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be obstacles, criticism, and people who would never understand her choice, but for the first time in years, she was living life on her own terms, and she decided that was worth any price. After all, sometimes the most revolutionary thing a person can do is simply choose to be happy, even if that happiness began with something as simple as buying a watermelon on the side of the road. If you enjoyed this story, please give us a like and consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us continue to bring you more exciting content. Turn on notifications so you don't miss our upcoming stories. M.